Yeah, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the special session, the panel session in memory of Dr. Hong Fauske, sponsored by American University Society, Supervisory Division. My name is Bao Yang from Data ANS Group, New York. I'm co-chairing with Dr. Jin Liao from Westinghouse. We are honored and humbled to host this session to pay tribute to the life and legacy of Dr. Hong Fauske, who passed away on September 27, 2021, at the age of 85. Dr. Fauske was a renowned leader and pioneer in the field of the nuclear and chemical process safety. He was the founder and emeritus president of the Fauske and Associates, which is a wholly owned subsidiary of the Westinghouse Electric Company. He was also the first director of the DOE Fast Reactor Safety Technology Management Center at the Argonne National Lab, and the first recipient of the University of Chicago Medal of the Distinguished Performance at Argonne. He published more than 200 papers, scientific articles, and held numerous patents in the area of nuclear and chemical process safety. He was a fellow of both American Nuclear Society and the American Institute of Chemical Engineering, AICHE, and a member of the United States American of the National Academy of Engineering. He was also a dedicated teacher, mentor, colleague, and friend to many of us in the nuclear community. Today, we have invited, originally four panelists. Unfortunately, one of them cannot make it today. We have four parents who have worked closely or, indirect related with Dr. Fauske in various capacity, and has very witnessed his remarkable contribution and achievement. Then we share their insight and reflection on Dr. Fauske's work of life and honor his memory and impact. Okay. In the following, I will have my co-chair, Dr. Jin Liao, to introduce the three panelists today. Thank you.
Today we have three panelists. So they are Marty, Bob, and Bob Hill. So let me introduce them one by one. First, let's start from Marty. Marty Price was a student of Bob Murray and who sponsored his SCD research. I don't know what's the SCD. Right now, he's a Chief Technology Officer of Fauske and Associates, and like Dr. Murray and Dr. Fauske is a member of the National Academy of Engineering, and he worked under Dr. Murray map code development, and later on Dr. Fauske on cleaning up of handful waste tanks and spent fuel and fortification plant safety. That's first panel is Marty, our side. Second one, Bob Murray. He's University in Notre Dame, bachelor degree 1962, and a master degree University of Notre Dame 1964, and a PhD of Notre Dame 1967. In 1965 to 67, he was in Argonne for his PhD thesis. After that, he spent a few years in U.S. Army and attached to U.S. NASA Lewis Research Center in Cleveland. And then the 1970s to the 80s, Argonne National Laboratory, reactor analysis and safety division. 1980 to 2012 is the co-founder of Fauske and Associates. These parties include reactor safety analysis for water, food, and sodium food reactor design, and whereas the famous two-phase critical flow experiments and models, that's pretty well known, and the MAP code, modular action analysis program, conception and two-phase flow model, and the code development for is also one of PWR in the high water reactor, and evaluation of Three Mile Island, Chernobyl, and Fukushima accident. He is also elected to the National Academy of Engineering in 2018. So last but not least, is Bob Hill from Argonne National Laboratory. I represent the early career of Dr. Fauske. He is a distinguished fellow at the Argonne National Laboratory, where he worked for 35 years, primarily on the fast reactor research and development. He has been National Technical Director for multi-laboratory DOE advanced reactor research and development programs, and is currently serving as a Technical Director of Generation 4 International Forum. And this is the third speaker. Thanks for joining us. So next, we will give every panelist opportunity to give a talk, either by presentation or just by talk. It's up to you. And the order, the call is Bowen. So before we do this order, because we have two from Fauske and Associate and one from Argonne, so I decided to make a Fauske person, Argonne and Fauske, do this order. So the first we'll give to Dr. Henry to give a talk.
You want the full screen? Yeah, it's fine. I was like, you see?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's
We could go down to a bar and do this. It's good to see these faces. This young lady back here is a PhD student. She doesn't know what good times we had arguing with each other. I'm going to give you some slides that I hope captures the major points that Hans would like to have people know about them. But before I do that, I have to convey a couple of things for two guys named Mike, who should be here. Mike Gromes and Mike Epstein, both of which were with us at Argonne National Laboratory, and both were with us at Fauske and Associates. And Mike Gromes, just his state of health right now, where traveling isn't in the cards. So in the slides of Hans, I have a quote in there that Mike offered at Hans's funeral, which I thought was very apropos. So we'll get to that one. Mike Epstein wanted to be here. And it turned out he has bad need of getting some eye surgery, and this is the only week that surgeon is available. So unfortunately couldn't come. So I sent him an email, come on in. We'd like to see some people under 50 here.
Go ahead.
So anyway, I sent Mike an email and I said, Mike, I understand you can't come. You know, if you have some slides you want me to show. He says, I said, I'll be happy to do it for you. And he got back to me just like that. He said, I don't have slides, but I've sent you something I'd like you to read. It would probably take me 3 or 4 minutes to read it. But this is also very reflective of just how Hans met, tutored people, had them grow, and they helped him grow too. Anyway, Mike, this comes from Mike Epstein. I first met Hans when I interviewed for a job at Argonne National Laboratory in May of 1970. On the day of the interview, I met with several other section managers, including Hans, who's that term, right? Section manager. Except for, he says, I had long since forgotten what transpired during his interviews, except for the one with Hans. That interview, which occurred over 50 years ago, is still firmly implanted in my memory. He asked me to describe the details of my PhD thesis topic. After I described the nature of the work, he asked questions in what I would later learn to be his usual polite manner, some of which I found difficult to answer, questions that not even my thesis advisor or committee thought of. I was amazed, parentheses, actually blown away, close parentheses, how quickly this fellow grasped the topic and was able to comment on key aspects of the thesis. On my way home that evening, I thought of nothing else but my interview with Hans Fauske, and I hoped I would land a job at Argonne, and more importantly, I hoped that I could work under Hans Fauske. My wish eventually came true. I was hired at Argonne National Laboratory, and within a few years, I found myself working with Hans. I use the words working with because Hans never made one feel that he was the boss, but instead he treated people working under him as colleagues. Fortunately for me, this was the beginning of a 40-year professional relationship with Dr. Hans Fauske. The work atmosphere he generated at FAI was such that every day I look forward to showing up at 8:30 sharp, especially on those days when I knew he was available to discuss ongoing technical problems. It was always a great joy for me when he would appear at my office door and say, "Mike, you ready to talk some science?" Due to his leadership and guidance, my career flourished. I consider myself the most lucky man from first meeting and then working with Hans, a man of sterling character and, of course, a giant in the fields of nuclear and chemical process safety. So you can see how what Mike Epstein thought of Hans, crystal clear. So let me just go through this with you, and you can stop. If you have any questions at any time, feel free to stop me. So Hans was born in Bergen. You all know that, I'm sure. And he was educated through gymnasium in Bergen. And he always liked to tell me, you know, in Norway, there was the public school that had a strong gymnasium. I went to the public school. I said, come on now, you told me that before. Interestingly enough, his undergraduate work was in chemistry at the Norwegian Institute, Technology Institute in Trondheim. It's now called the Norwegian University of Science and Technology. He graduated in 1958. And then he decided to come to this country because he had an uncle who lived in Minneapolis that he could stay with. And he wanted to get advanced degrees from the University of Minnesota. And he did so under the guidance of Professor Herb Isman, of course, the name very well known by all of us over the years, at ACRS. And Herb, of course, is in the chemical engineering department. So I went from chemistry to chemical engineering. And he said the toughest thing to do in an exam was transfer everything from inches into centimeters. In 1959, he got his master's degree, and he always wanted to go on PhD. And he continued his advanced studies at Minnesota, but the subject, of course, was two-phase critical flow. And when he got his thesis done, I don't know if any of you guys all knew this, but he didn't defend his thesis in Minneapolis. He defended his thesis by taking it back to the Norwegian Institute, Technology Institute, in 1963, and they invited all the guests in from surrounding countries. And getting old, I can't come up with names. Who was the hydraulics expert from the Netherlands? At the time, he was one of the judges in his thesis. And he had to present his thesis in a tux, and 3 judges were in the front row, and then other people could be behind. And of course, he passed it with flying colors. But because he did that, he was the youngest person, at least at that time, to get the Doctor of Science in Norway.
Didn't they publish his thesis as an Argonne greenback?
Yes.
Because I've got a copy.
They did. Because he came to Argonne right after, but I still have the copy too, which And every time, I mean, of course, my thesis was in that field too, but every time I would start getting into a question, I'd say something about, we can take this from you. He said, don't take anything from my thesis. And he was very adamant about it because in his thesis, there was always an issue of dealing with high slip ratios. With those of you that have messed around with two-phase flow patterns over time. And when you get to high velocity flow, slip ratios really they're not that high. And he had a lot of data that he took, but they were all principally in the range of fairly high quality flows, more than 10%. So when you get up to 10% or so, everything is small amounts of water and the void fraction is very, very high. So he kept telling me, your thesis isn't there. It's the lower qualities. That's what we're interested in, non-equilibrium effects. So very interesting to work with him from that point of view because he was always pushing, saying, don't waste your time on mine. We're going for something else. While Hans was at Argonne, he had a number of awards from ANS, and I'm sure most of you already know. The one that at least Marty's going to touch further on this, not just the ones from ANS, but other ones that he received outside of ANS. The Tommy Thompson Award for field reactor safety. And everybody knows Tommy Thompson, especially if you haven't. Those 2-volume books. You still got them in your office, Marty?
Sure do.
He's a fellow of the American Nuclear Society, Thermal Hydraulics Division Technical Achievement Award in 1991, the George Lawrence Pioneering Award in 2012, which is when he retired. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, he was selected to the National Academy in 2016, National Academy of Engineering. So, my good friend Hans, 57 years worth. First time I met Hans, I was a summer student at Argonne, and things were parceled up into doing things for Ford. There were 3 different people that would come up with problems. We'd have a group of 3 guys work for 4 weeks for that person, then change to another, and And I worked with Hans was one of those things that summer, and that fall he became my thesis advisor. So I had this Midwest University's grant to get your thesis, and down in Argonne, and Mike Groves had a similar kind of thing. I didn't have an advisor for about 4 months, and so they didn't pay me anything. I still had to go to school. For 4 months. Anyway, 2 years later, he was my boss. And again, just like Mike said, he was never my boss. We always were working on things together. I always teased him about that. You're the boss, you're going to do that. 13 years later, Hans, Mike Groves, and myself became business partners as co-founders of Fauske Associates. And by 2012, we were all retired from business, except for consulting as required. So 57 years, the only time I wasn't in touch with them on a daily basis were the 21 months I spent in the Army for NASA at the Lewis Research Center. The Fauske Associates, the main, just about everybody knows this, was founded by, of course, Hans, Mike Groves, and by the way, Mike Groves is a close friend of Hans's. He and I were in the same class at Notre Dame. We were in the same graduate school classes and sort of classmates. We went to Argonne at the same time. We were office mates, but we did our theses. I went into the Army. I came back from the Army, and Mike Groves and I were office mates in Building 208 for a long time. So we knew each other real well. Great guy. The central areas of expertise in both experiments and analyses in Fauske Associates were nuclear and chemical reactor safety, obviously. To begin with, though, I'd like to borrow from a comment that Mike Groves made in his funeral that I was talking to you about, mentioned earlier. So Mike had this read: the mathematician Marquette described the genius mind as one of 2 kinds, the ordinary and the magician. The ordinary genius is the person who makes a scientific contribution such that once you see it and understand it, you feel that you could have done the same if you were only a little smarter and worked very much harder. The magician's work is such that after you understand it, you could not duplicate it originally, no matter how hard you work. And the magician's methods are intuitive and largely inscrutable, but most certainly correct in all dimensions. Hans was a rare genius in the magician class. So I thought Mike, you really hit it on the head. I'm going to, Hans covered a lot of areas. I'm going to just give you these areas that he was interested in, but then I want to take one nuclear area and one chemical area and show you the impact of it. So his technical areas are, of course, steam water critical flow, especially non-equilibrium conditions like this. But they kept telling me over and over again for mine, no, we're not going to deal with high boiling fractions. That liquid sodium superheat and its relevance to LMFBR, liquid metal fast breeder reactor licensing. And we'll touch base on that in a second. Then in reactor and out of reactor sodium voiding experiments. And Mike Holmes did the in reactor experiments, and I was responsible for the out of reactor experiments. Sodium voiding experiments, not easy to do. Then we had vapor explosions and their relevance to both LMFBR and water-cooled reactors. And these studies led Hans and I to write a book for the ANS. It's entitled Experimental Technical Basis for Evaluating Vapor, Steam Explosions, and Nuclear Reactors. And we just tried to capture a lot of the experimental work that was really controlling the whole licensing basis and made sure that all of it was there so people could come and find it. Again, then, on the fast breeder side, he was involved in the Clinch River energetics. We'll back to Clinch River in a second. And the successful licensing of FFTF. So FFTF was a fast flux test facility in Hanford. It was a loop system, sodium cooled, and they actually did get a license, even though they didn't have to do it, but they did it for the exercise of it and making sure that they didn't leave anything out. But they used that then to license the Clinch River reactor, even though they had decided not to build the reactor at the time because the government didn't. This was the time when the funds were tough to come by, and so they dialed all this back. But they finished the energetics, and that was documented then that they got to a case that was agreed to with the NRC. The energetics question was satisfied. So that's a place to start if you ever come back to that kind of design in the future. Then oversight of the import industry, the wide studies after the TMI2 exam, and of course, with the reactor TMI2 accident, the NRC required every plant to start doing specific things. So instead of each plant doing something different, the industry came together and with all the vendors, utilities, the ANEs, and other consultants to develop the import program to attack all of these. So every plant, whether it was VWR or PWR, would follow the same overall strategy. Then he also had oversight of the MAP co-development program, which was developed inside of the import program. Then the other part of it that I'd like to just characterize the various things that he really fell in love with. Oversight for the chemical industry that sponsored the DIRES program, which DIRES is the Design Institute for Emergency Relief Systems. Just to give you, because we're going to talk about this in a second, before DIRES got into this and FAI got into it, they were basically taking the historical events in the chemical business where they had runaway chemical reactions and not necessarily the same reactions, but they said, well, you know, so-and-so had 2 inches and that blew up, so we got to make it 4 inches. Didn't even have the same reactivity. And so it was kind of a guessing program. And a lot of times they guessed very much wrong. So anyway, this now turned into development analytical experimental approaches to chemical runaway reactions. And these developed into the vent sizing package and the reactive system screening tool. The screening tool basically, I'll tell you in a second, but that tells you what the reactivity is of that recipe. And the vent sizing package tells you how big the vent you need. Then they folded those all together into the advanced RSST, which is what's really being used by the industry today. And then the evaluations of the Hanford laboratory waste storage tanks, it goes back to the late 40s and on. And these wastes were still sitting there and having committee after committee after committee. But Hans and Marty did a terrific job of getting this thing tied down to what mattered and what didn't, and get down to what's the strategy that you have to follow. Downflow in the Savannah River project, which you guys are very familiar with. And also the analytical solutions evaluation submitted in the legal assessment for the MSC Flaminia cargo ship accident. Let's see, I'm going to tell you about that in a second. And the Smithsonian Channel has this in one of the disasters at sea. If you ever watch the Smithsonian Channel, it's worth watching. So, Hans's practical solution to things. Liquid sodium cooled reactors like Fermi 1 and FFTF required experimental basis to understand the necessity of being able to predict the liquid superheat to initiate boiling. It's an essential part of the licensing message. You got to have something that experimentally you can show what it will be. As of 1967, the meeting they had next to Provence, there were 4 laboratories, one from each from a different country. The first one, as you can see, had measurements from 15 to 160 degrees C for liquid sodium, just for the first bubble. If you have a superheated 160 degrees C, you're looking at a pretty violent ejection. Second one from 12 to 350 degrees centigrade. Another one from 5 to 50 degrees centigrade, and the fourth one from 20 to 80 degrees centigrade. Now, this shows you how the data was plotted on semi-log paper. So the log is here. There's the typical shotgun result. In other words, there is no experimental basis that you use this to generate. So Hans was asked to resolve this and figure out how we should be doing experiments to justify the design basis. So after reviewing the available results, showed that the usual way in which these experiments were done, they'd be doing, several experiments in a single day. So you get one to pop and then cool it down a little bit, heat it back up again, see how much superheat you need before you get a bubble. And typically people usually found as they got longer, the superheats got higher. So in Hans's view, they were likely changing the incipient nucleation processes and what's available. And he loved to talk about nucleation. He suggested that all tests be performed with experimental facility that has been subjected to conditions close to the steady state operating behavior for the reactor. And we're talking about sodium cooled reactors. So then only a single test should be performed before going back and repeating the same steady state preparation. In other words, it's only the first nucleation you care about in the reactor, because you're talking about a design basis event. You don't get these happening every hour on the hour. And as a result, the resulting experiments found that incipient boiling happened at negligible superheat. So basically, once you got rid of ways that you could change the superheat and you create it based upon what the characteristics are, especially with gas that can be dissolved in the coolant sodium, you can have nitrogen dissolved in sodium. that you got gas in all these little nooks and crannies, and that controlled the system. On the chemical runaway reaction side, FAI studies on reactions in the DIRES program really focused down on Hans's final direction was this number one I have here. How can reaction kinetics be determined for a single recipe? And then this is what led to the development of the RSST. Once you know that, how can this information be interpreted in terms of energy release involving gas or vapor discharge? This is what led to the vent sizing program. And then the integration of the RSST and the vent sizing program really got to the advanced RSST and they handle people that handle each recipe. So from a practical point of view, this approach gives you the necessary safety information to be determined by testing a chemical recipe of interest. So once you know what it is that the recipe is, then you have a little vial that's about the size of a Christmas tree ornament. And you're going to run this on heat up transient until you see it start to take off. So you've defined the reaction characteristics. Now you know what you're dealing with. How long do you have? How important are the things that you can put in to basically keep the reaction from happening in the solution? So on and so forth. So once we do that, then this reveals the needed reaction kinetics along with the two-phase behavior of the liquid and vapor or gas trying to get out of the tank. That tells you whether or not you're able to vent it correctly. And you can directly take the results of the ARSST and you can apply it directly to a tank that's 10,000 gallons, one for one. So these steps provide essential safety improvement. They were not possible before this technology was developed. So in use of this knowledge, on January 14, 2012, the MSC Flaminia cargo ship was sailing from South Carolina to Antwerp, Belgium. 1,000 miles out to sea, they had two explosions that killed 3 of the 23 crew members and started a fire that could not be contained and threw several container vessels into the Atlantic, never to be seen again. With the onboard fire, the ship was abandoned for several days. Then it was reboarded after it slowed down so they could get everything cooled down and towed to Northern Europe where it was repaired. And this initiated much finger pointing and threats on lawsuits regarding what caused this accident. Once the ship was reboarded, it was clear that the cargo vessel was deposited below deck. That's the one that started the whole event. However, this cargo vessel was specifically required to be positioned out on the open above deck so it could be subject to additional cooling. In addition, it was mistakenly positioned in the cargo vessel next to a cargo vessel was also generating heat. Both of these were significant errors. The company that manufactured the chemical mixture asked Hans analyze our product and tell us what happened in this cargo vessel that got put down below deck. So evaluations of the chemical mixture and location said it was mistakenly placed, clearly showed that it was exposed to conditions that were bound to deplete the inhibitor and then produce a runaway reaction, which it did. So as a result of Dr. Fauske's testimony, the technical information that resulted from the chemical reaction kinetics were central points for the legal arguments that the judge agreed to in the New York court. This showed that the manufacturer had provided all the needed technical information, as well as a requirement that the vessel should have been stored up on the deck. So the company that loaded the cargo vessels on the ship was found to be responsible for the accident. And that this manufacturer managed to be able to stay in business because they finally got it right. Well, let me just end with a couple things. In 2016, Hans became a U.S. citizen. I told you, you had to get over it. You really want to get them mad, you could say, well, you don't have to pay the income taxes, you have to pay this. What are you talking about? And the one on the right, Thea and Judy at home. And then on the left is the Fauske family, of course, Hans and Judy. And on the left of the picture is of son Chris, the oldest son. And then Kirk, Chris now lives in the suburbs of Chicago, and Kirk lives in Phoenix, suburb of Phoenix. And on the right is Hans and I at FAI with their two wives. So, if you have any questions when we get done with this, we're more than happy to address.
Okay, I'm going to cover some of the early career of Dr. Fauske. I was asked to give some reporting from Argonne, so I was able to talk to some people who had worked with him in Argonne. I personally did not, so I don't have any, and nearly as many anecdotes or pictures as the other two speakers. So, but I just wanted to recognize the early career and the contributions at Argonne from Dr. Fauske. So technical contributions at Argonne. As we heard from in the last talk, Dr. Fauske joined Argonne in 1963 after completing his graduate work. He had R&D contributions in reactor safety. These were for primarily at this point in time for the advanced reactor technologies. He was a recognized expert in fuel-coolant interactions. Some of the people that I talked with and interviewed for this indicated that he worked with them, similar to what we heard from Dr. Henry, developing some of the phenomenological models, and some of those are still the models that are used in the codes today. He also did significant research and development work on vapor steam explosions during his Argonne tenure. Those were the two areas in particular that he was known for the contributions during this time period. As we heard in the previous presentation, he had major contributions to the licensing of the Clinch River breeder reactor. This was a first-of-a-kind licensing that followed the FFTF licensing and was completed with NRC, or the predecessor to NRC, actually, at that point in time. In the 1980s, he also was working after he left Argonne, there was a collaboration between Fauske Associates and Argonne. They were doing safety analysis for the German fast reactor, the SMR reactor. So he did continue to do some work in the field of advanced reactor safety and licensing. Also after his Argonne years. He did do original work. There was a lot of work besides the fact that some of these models didn't exist. We were also looking at a variety of fuel forms. That continues today, where there's a lot of international debate on fuel forms for fast reactors, and he did some of the original work also looking at those distinctions between the different fuel forms. So that's just a short rundown of some of the technical contributions he made during his 17 years at Argonne. Did want to also talk about the positions, because he definitely was in leadership positions at Argonne and impacted many people's careers. We've heard already from Dr. Henry some of the students who he mentored and then became Argonne employees, and then eventually worked with him at Fauske Associates. But I just wanted to recognize that on line management, I just learned in the previous presentation that he was a section manager. So that's at Argonne, that's typically somebody who's got 5 to 10 people who they're overseeing and doing the work for. And his exit position with Argonne in line management was as an associate division director. Division director is typically on the order of about 100 people. Not nearly as much technical work at the associate division director level, but a lot of oversight and a lot of development of the staff and oversight then of several sections as the associate division director. He also had a major program leadership role, in particular when DOE instituted technology management centers in the late 70s, in 1978, which was their approach at that point in time. He was the first director of the Fast Reactor Technology Management Center. This was in the same time period as the Clinch River licensing, so that was quite appropriate with the Fast Reactor TMC, but indicative of his major leadership role in that field for fast reactor safety and in the licensing for those early fast reactors in the United States. Finally then, just a little bit about his reputation and legacy. In addition to his technical contributions, many of the future advanced reactor leaders at Argonne and the safety experts started their career and were trained to some degree or other under Dr. Fauske's leadership. And interviewing those people who are still around, he left in '80, so there aren't that many still around, but the ones that are, I talked to. His professional conduct, the common descriptors were knowledgeable and real recognition of how he knew about it. I also enjoyed the story from the previous presentation about after the thesis coming and talking with him, and he right away was able to pick up on some of the issues with that. Approachable, which is not always true in the management types of positions that he was in. Friendly and gentleman and repeatedly from the different people kind. So very much a professional conduct in the scientific field. And then lastly Dr. Fauske left Argonne in the Reactor Analysis and Safety Division in 1980 in order to found his new company, Fauske & Associates, which is what we're hearing about in the other two presentations. So I'd like to thank you again and thank you for the opportunity to learn more about Dr. Fauske's career through this panel.
Thank you. Good afternoon, and I got to be the cleanup hitter, I guess, even though there's just three of us. So I'm going to give you some information that sort of spans the Argonne years and the timeline of Fauske & Associates. Let's see how I go down. Great. Well, we'll start with life in brief. Some of this you've already heard. He passed away a little more than 2 years ago, leaving behind his wife, Judy, and two sons, Chris, as we always called him, and Kirk. And he had 3 grandchildren and a brother, Sigmund. Well, by the way, this picture here is hanging in his former office, and it has the caption on the bottom that says, "Without data, all you have are opinions." It's a very good mantra. We've already noted that Hans got an MSc in chemical engineering from Minnesota and then a DSc from the Norwegian Institute of Technology. When he was at Argonne, he supervised a lot of doctors and PhD graduate students through collaboration with the University of Chicago and other places, notably Notre Dame and Dr. Henry. He served for 2 years as director of the DOE Fast Reactor Technology Management Center, which has just been mentioned. He was the first director, so responsible for planning and management of our national programs, and he was considered a leading world authority on fast breeder reactor safety. In 1980, he, along with Bob and Mike Rones, founded Fauske & Associates, and a mere 6 years later, we became part of the Westinghouse Electric Company, and I remember finishing up a program to do chemical equilibrium during a core concrete interaction when the Westinghouse people came and cracked open beers in the conference room to celebrate. During the past 43 years, we have maintained a national and international reputation for innovation And Hans basically led us to be considered a world leader in both nuclear and chemical process safety. He's been involved in so many wide-ranging issues, and Bob gave you a list of, was it 14 or 15 independent types of things that Hans has done over his career. Again, more than 200 papers. The book on steam explosions, the ANS monograph. By the way, then besides being raised in Bergen, Norway, he spoke 7 languages. Besides the publications, he was a great leader, and as has been said in many of the presentations, a patient mentor, but always a tireless competitor. He loved to compete, and a devoted family man. So to put a few pictures to some things you've already heard, these are plaques that are on the wall in Hans's former office. On the left, it's showing him being fellow of the American Nuclear Society, and on the right, a fellow of the AICAG. And major awards from both. On the left, we have the Tommy Thompson Award. And I think he was maybe the second or third recipient of the Tommy Thompson Award. And on the right, the Robert Wilson Award in Nuclear Chemical Engineering from AICAG. He was inducted into the National Academy of Engineering in 2016, and here's his signature accepting his induction. Hans was a real pack rat. I was able to get all kinds of material from his office. I'm sort of in charge of going through his office and his papers and sorting them. To put more pictures to words, in Mike's question, that on the left, we have the cover of Hans's doctoral thesis as an Argonne National Laboratory report. And on the right, a paper co-written with Bob Henry on the critical flow of one-component mixtures and nozzles, orifices, and short tubes. And also mentioned, and this is from the Argonne newsletter, okay, so he was a pack rat, but this gets to this is the first University of Chicago award that he received. I can't read it without my reading glasses. Dr. Hans Fauske, Reactor Analysis and Safety Division, that's Hans up there, early Hans, for outstanding contributions for developing better understanding of basic phenomena essential to the design and safety analysis of a liquid metal fast breeder reactor. But these are the first recipients here of the newly established U of C Awards for Distinguished Performance at Argonne. That's a cool thing. We have the whole newsletter, of course, not just the cover page. Now we get to the Fauske timeline by decade here. Starting at the left, 1980, and going up to the present time. But that's where we began development of the MAP code and the large-scale Dyer's blowdown tests. And when I say large-scale, Bob, how many gallons was the big vessel out in the parking lot? This thing is like 15 or 20 feet tall. The reaction vessel is, and then it has to blow down into something that's much larger in volume. But something that big got scaled down to, as Bob described, a 10 to 50 cc unit, which is going to be, there it is, the RSST, and the vent sizing package. MAP 3 was released during the time period of 1980 to 1990. I was working on it then. So those are our major accomplishments. Half of our work was chemical process safety, and the other half nuclear safety. But here's where we really evolved from doing these first of a kind experiments into having products so we could sell products on the chemical side. Not only would we do the testing, but we could sell the products for other people to test. And then with the MAP code, we could train people on MAP, and we could start doing plant analyses for people. So in the 90s, that was when the Dyer's methodology became formalized, and the severe accident management guidelines, the technical basis, was created. Bob being a key member, key author of those. That gets to the point of having a single strategy for all of the US LWRs at the time under the IDCOR program. MAP 4 and MAP 4 VDER were released. And in fact, MAP 4 was the first piece of software owned by EPRI. So the map was started under IDCOR, but then given to EPRI. Was the first piece of EPRI software ever to go under nuclear quality assurance, which, because it had already been written, meant we had a design review process. There was a map for CANDO, and then finally the ARSST, the Advanced Reactor System Screening Tool, which sort of coupled the old RSST and PSP together. During the 2000s, it's hard for me to read here. We actually took the software we'd written for Hanford safety, which embodied a lot of, basically we wrote a map-like program for the US DOE world. And we called it HANSF, HANSF, which stood for Hanford Spent Fuel. Okay. Hans lived with that. But then we began to use it for the waste tanks, for the waste treatment plant, vitrification plant. And so we renamed it FATE for Facility Aerosol Thermal and Explosion Tool. So it's basically a source term tool for the DOE world. And we're now using it for Japan, for both Fukushima, for TEPCO, for planning, for being able to do routine analysis of debris retrieval and safe storage, and for accidents at the Tokai Mura reprocessing plant. Wait, that's not the name of it. The reprocessing plant in the far north of Japan. Anyway, that takes like a year and a half to get DOE permission, by the way. The VSP2 was created also during that decade. And then when we get to the last decade here, reading classes. Much better. We began our on-site safety services, which meant sending people out in the field to walk down places to look for dust explosion hazards and to look for chemical reactive safety hazards. We have a large-scale thermal hydraulic testing facility, which Bob helped to initiate. We've done vortex, is it in bubble entrainment? What was the NRC issue that we solved?
We got a vortex that's sucking what area into the
Okay. Bob invented a vortex preventer. Well, we did a lot of source term assessment. We started branching out at this point into working for TEPCO and working for Sellafield. In other words, we got out of the Department of Energy area and expanded it to be an international thing. In fact, the very last picture then from the current decade, that's a picture of an experiment we did for TEPCO, which is a full height section of a cask that might be used to store Fukushima fuel debris. If it were real debris, there would be 1,000 pounds of UO2 in this unit. The purpose of these experiments was to show that the hydrogen that's generated by radiolysis could be safely vented from such a thing. In other words, you can save $1 billion by not having to dry it. In other words, if we had to do it all over again at Hanford, we would never have done vacuum drying. And the guy who was in charge of that program at the time, Dr. Phil Lasco, didn't want to do it, but DC told him he had to do it. You know, his hands were tied. But TEPCO is probably not going to repeat these mistakes, which also happened at Sellafield. Sellafield went from vacuum drying to passive vented storage, just like this. So that's a Fauske timeline. And all these tricks of the trade, things that Hans taught me along the way, and Bob taught me along the way. So here's a nice picture from our 20th anniversary. Mike Epstein is on the left. He was the one whose words Bob read earlier. Hans to his right. In the middle, Lisa Kars, who was their secretary at Argonne and became one of the first FAI employees and still works at FAI today. This picture is in fact right outside of her office. There's of course Bob Henry and George Hauser, who was a reactor operator at Argonne. I think he had the scram button. CP5. He had the scram button from it, I recall. And going from the 20th anniversary to the 35th anniversary, Bob showed you a picture of himself and Hans with their wives. And here's a picture with Lisa and Jane, two sisters, originally Lisa and Jane Brown-Barrick from Lamont, but both working for them at Argonne, who then came over when FAI was formed. So last but not least then, the picture of Hans and what Hans's office looks like today. Turned it into a very pretty conference room. Books on the left, which I'm helping to sort out, and I'll put more papers in there after I get them sorted out. So thank you very much for your time. I'll take any questions you have, then, please.
Audience, question or comment? Anybody?
We'd love to hear other stories.
Yeah, anybody you can ask questions to panelists. And if you have interaction with Hans before, please share your memory. I know a bunch of you have interacted with him before. So yeah, feel free.
How many stories do you want?
Whoa, unlimited for you.
So at least in my case, I first met Hans and Bob, you will remember, in '76 at the Chicago Fast Reactor Safety Conference. I was what we'll call a wet behind the ears young fellow who thought he understood things. So we had a beer. We had a number of beers that night, right? And that was my first interaction. As they said, Hans was a gentleman and a scholar of tremendous material. And I'll stop there. I'll wait for other stories. That was the starting of an interesting time meeting and having technical conversations.
That's in the 70s.
Just a second.
It was scary. What the heck? 77? Anyway.
77, I gave a presentation in front of the Argonne group. Remember that one?
Which one, Mike? I'm sorry.
That was for something to do, I think, with so it would be 77. So it had something to do with Clinch River, I seem to remember, because at the time the NRC was demanding ACDAs of a certain energy would have to be considered in terms of safety analysis, and there was a series of calculations that were being done by a number of people. It made for an interesting meeting.
And I think there was roughly an order of magnitude difference in what one path would give you versus the other. And I mean, it's the kind of thing where you just don't even want to be able to come across those things in the safety environment, which they didn't eventually. But that's when Hans really sat down. They asked him to sit down. Let's see a whole line through every piece of physics.
Yeah. Well, my name is Bill Chen. Actually, the first time I met Hans was 1974. I got my doctoral degree in 1974. And in early 1974, well, which is 7 years behind Bob, Henry, and Michael. And I got an interview at the Argonne in early 74. Wow, few moments would be half century ago. And that was the first time I met Hans, as well as Bob. And the last time I met Hans was in 2016 in New Orleans, when I chaired a session like this one, a memorial session for Sam Levine. At that time, we have 6 speakers. Now we have only 3. And Mike and myself, it could be 5. We have 6 speakers, and 3 of them, half of them, were from Argonne National University. And then include Bob Henry, Fauske and Bill Schwab. They're both from Hans and Bob and myself. We're all with our years, reactor analysis and safety division, whereas Bill Schwab is with CT, component technology. Remember that different buildings here. And those are, so my time overlapped with from the Hans and Bob and Michael were from 1974 to up to the time that they defined the FAI. Actually, you guys have left couple from the division a couple of years earlier when the Hans become the director for TMC, Technical Mentor Center, and also one of the previous the speaker mentioned about Mike Epstein, and he was my I joined Argonne with first with the group the post-accident hip removal with Lou Baker, and then Lou Baker joined the TMC, and then Mike Epstein became my boss, and who later on very quickly become one of the FAI. Now, before most of you may identify Hans with the I and or the Argonne National Lab, but my first impression of Hans from technical point of view is FCI, fuel coolant investment gun, and the steam explosion. Under what condition would be energetic? I tell you, as a young researcher, I got my doctoral degree in '74. I began attending the ANS meeting, and the following 5 to 10 years, there's only one person speaking everywhere, and I was with authority. And that I also you mentioned about the University of Chicago, and also a couple of those Notre Dame as well. But I believe Hans also very involved with the Northwestern University. And at that time, probably might remember, and of course Bob, the professor, the George, Bancroft, right? The George Bancroft. And so I actually have, and Hans had given a lot of short courses at the Northwestern University, and I've taken one of those. So I really, of course, I know Bob much better than Hans, and but my recollection is Hans really is someone that really come up with new ideas, and also is and during lunchtime you can see Bob is joking, but very early in the morning you can see while I'm trying to work, I said, who is that guy? Then I look back, it was Hans. Very self-disciplined, and of course, physically, I would say the Bob is still much stronger. Friends.
Probably should mention that Hans had a couple of other students, one of which was a lot of people here will identify with, was Theo Theophanis. Yes, did his PhD work for Herb Hesman also.
Yeah.
And so, then there was another, who was 4 years behind me at Notre Dame. And I didn't know him until I came back from the Army, and he was just finishing up his thesis at Argonne. And he had Bancroft was his thesis advisor for his PhD at Northwestern, the undergraduate for Notre Dame. He ended up being the #2 guy for British Petroleum. When British Petroleum picked up Standard Oil, and he moved from Chicago to London and spent 5 or 6 years in London. Doug, it's hard to get old, And my Rolodex still spins, but it's a lot slower.
And you mentioned about students that, Bob, you probably still remember SCL, right? When John Argonne, Professor Ishii, now I have to review, the very famous thermodynamic, and myself, and also SCL, we all joined Argonne about the same time. And Ishii was there a year and a half before we did. And then the SCL, they went to Carnegie Mellon. Somehow they've been doing those boiling work, continue with under Bob Henry. And then a few years later, I left Argonne for Penn State. In Penn State, I'm still with Penn State, and this is Penn State, my second job. Okay, and thank God for the almost half century. And then the issue, they finally got the dean of engineering actually tried to Chicago twice, tried to finally get him away from the Argonne to Purdue. Yeah, but when Hans become the director for the TMC Technical Program Center, where Bob and Mike went with Hans, there's another faculty member who are doing consulting. and we found them. Then I follow. I mentioned about the George Bangkok, but Ivan Captain. Right? You guys remember for many years in another capital who passed away there. Yeah, he came to Ireland quite often.
Oh, yeah. Marty had a quote, without data, all you have is an opinion. That wasn't, that's what Hans used all the time. And Hans got it from Hans Bader. He was talking about steam explosions, vapor explosions. And Hans Bader was on one of the committees, so we come down and review committee and review everything that various divisions, in our case, the reactor analysis safety unit, what they were all doing. And that's when Beta said one time, because we were talking about experiments, and he was always a big fan of that. He said, without data, all you have is an opinion.
Actually, I want to echo on that. My first time I met Hans was actually not 70, I believe it's 1990. We were running the project for the downflow summary project.
Downflow,
yeah, at Columbia University. I was the one running all the experimental work. And then the first time, I was just graduate, just got my degree from Columbia University, and I was doing all these tests. And one of these days, I started, Han, Eros Chong, who else? I think George Baker was there, Peter Griffin, Peter Griffin from MIT. They all came together as a consultant, DOE. Yes. And they all come together. So, wow, all these big names, the tall figure was coming, so I was asked to make a presentation. But behind my presentation, I was commenting, in the past, we made a mistake because the survey project was started because original design we're using the single tube data, CHF data, to design all the annual multiple channel geometry for CHF material. So back then, the project name was flow excursion, downward flow excursion. So Han will say, okay, in the past we made a mistake. From now on, we based on our analysis, now is flow instability, the main concern. So one of the I say, okay, excuse me, Dr. Han, I don't think so. At the time, because what I saw, I only believe what I saw from the data. So I presented data. I said, yes, they are flow instability induced, but also they are local CHF. Could happen before, And to my surprise, I thought he was going to be very upset because I figured out that I'm so used. But he was like, he was so nice. He sit down and show me the data. So we have a discussion after that. So discussion and night work with project manager. We went back and forth. And based on that conversation, actually I was working on a lot of work on the local structure, which is some of the results I just presented last year during the material work. Talk about that's actually what started from that conversation. It's a long inference, so I can believe that he actually really only when you see the data, what is short, and that's much more important than opinion.
Right.
Actually, about the same time, right? I think we also had a downflow problem with
the project. I was being read.
And Hans was a consultant to us, and then we tried to understand what's the technical basis behind flow reversal in terms of limited power, because that was an issue identified by DOE. So the reactor was shut down because we don't quite understand, or at least DOE at that point did not quite buy the technical basis behind the operating power. Because once the flow stops in a downflow situation, the flow can reverse. And the question is, what happens during the stagnation part of the transfer? And Hans was very good. I think he was able to conceptualize the problem into small chunks. And he was able to use simple but appropriate physics to stitch all the pieces together to come up with a solid. And then I think that is really a unique capability that I think Bob also mentioned. I mean, he's the magician. No, it's not fact. Before I know Hans and personally, I came across his name the first time, like many of us, when we took our double hydraulic course in school, right? The Henry Fauske, physical flow correlation. That's the first time I came across the name Fauske. And then later on, when I worked at the Troll Nuclear Power Plant, of course, I mean, we worked with FAI using the MAP2 code to develop the source code to help the licensing of the nuclear station.
Mike Cordini will remember this, but when vapor explosions, steam explosions, especially after 3 Mile Island, too, because we were in a meeting in south of England, Bournemouth. Yeah, Bournemouth meeting. Not too long after 3 Mile Island, about a week or so. And I saw on TV, they made this thing up where they had a vapor explosion, steam explosion inside the vessel. Blew out a cloud. And I thought, Jesus, this is getting out of hand. Not the case. But anyway, we had a lot of those, what we call like specialist meetings or something like that. And we probably had 2 or 3 a year. Some would be in the States, some would be in Europe, Japan, yes. And some of them got a little testy at times. But
We never argued. There was no arguments at all.
yeah. I mean, I'm sure all of you of that time, but we worked for a government agency like Argonne National Laboratory. And if we left the country, we had to leave the country on a U.S.-owned airline. So if we're going to Europe, I remember the first time I went to Sweden, I had to fly to London first. And back in those days, changed now, but I mean, the central terminal was just like a big room with where all the shops came up. And there was tobacco smoke from every country you could. And I got there at 8 o'clock in the morning, and I was supposed to fly then from there to Copenhagen to a smaller city in the south of Sweden. And my flight wasn't there. So I go up to the desk, I said, "Where is my flight?" They said, it's stuck in Oslo, London. I said, "What is it going to get here?" He says, "Oh, probably this evening." It was 8 o'clock in the morning, but I've been sleeping, and I hardly slept coming over. Yeah, you're breathing all this other stuff. But I kept walking around just trying to keep from falling asleep. So, but anyway, what I was going to get to is Hans and I went to Europe, I don't know how many times together for things like these specialist meetings and morning meetings as well. And we always had to fly back through London because we had to get on a TWA flight back to the country. So we had this ritual that we would make sure that we got to the bar ahead of, at least so we had one British bitters before we got on the plane. That was a good time.
I wanted to bring my comments associated with Hans. I did not know Hans well, but I knew those that he mentored very well through the MAP program. My career was in the utility industry with the Atomic Electric Company at the time. Experienced TMI, and then joined in with the past years with running on and factors associated with the MAP program. And that was a wonderful product that really helped the utility industry in the U.S. move forward and answer all the NRC questions that had to do with severe accidents for several years. And Bob and Marty and Fauske Company moving forward really helped the industry through that. I mean, as Marty said, that program turned crank time and time again, not only in the responses to the severe accident, but then moving into the aspect of severe accident analysis for probabilistic risk assessment. And it's a starting point that really helped the ability to move forward and then continue.
The NRC pretty much had no choice but to develop Melcor
Yes,
because they needed something integrated that
that's
they
right.
didn't have. Yeah.
Didn't throw in a story. I'm saying I'm younger than all you people have been talking. I still feel old.
Are you trying to make the school members?
I still feel younger, but the only time I shook Hans' hand was when I visited FAI for training in 2005. But maybe to appeal to a sense of competition, when I got out of school, went to Idaho National Engineering Lab in the late 80s, obviously, safety, LOCA, synthesizing block data was a big deal. And critical flow was it. So I'm working in the same group as Dick Rinson, John Trapper. So of course they have their names attached to one. And then the next summer, Fred Moody comes and teaches a class. Of course, I'm going to take Fred Moody, but I'm taking a class. So I have to do a project. So I'm thinking, okay, great. I will look at, I'll model with my new skills in C programming language, the competing critical flow models at the time, right? Trap, Moody, and of course the Hidrogauss. And so I have these papers, right? Now, and Marty, you put the paper up on the screen. And so I have that paper, and of course I have Fred's, and I have Vic and John's papers, and I'm sitting down at my keyboard and beginning to write stuff. And I'm only 24 or whatever at the time, right? 1989, so you're 25 maybe. And making heads or tails of these papers, and I get to your paper, the Hans and Bob, your paper, and I can read that paper. I can understand that paper. It was what guided me through that project. And then of course, the other two, there's a lot of similarity with models, but to get you through that project, it was that. And then I compared it to loft data, and guess who did better? I mean, it was that. Of course, if I go to Vic and say, why don't we use this correlation? Wait, well, I got my correlation, and if you went to Fred, of course, he got his correlation. But in my heart, he won. Y'all won with that. But to add on to that, mentioning math, it's the elegance of these models, whether you want to call it the magician's models, what have you. Obviously, that philosophy went into math, and it was so accessible. And so when I was doing severe accident stuff in the mid 2000s, get into that. And whereas today, when we try to kill something with all this horsepower, you lose something, that connection to the physics. You lose the intuition that I think is born by being exposed to those kind of innovative solutions. So that's certainly a legacy. I appreciate it.
I'm glad it was readable.
They're all probably hard, but
Hans was always driving, keep it simple.
Yeah, I can comment. I because I know work with hands, so much younger generation, but I do get a benefit from, for example, this chocolate flow model. It's still the state of art. I'm a little bit surprised there's nothing really progress in last maybe 30 years of state of art for chocolate flow. Why develop this for local code for Westinghouse? It's still that chocolate flow model. Bob and Hans that developed many years ago. But Yeah, that's the one benefit. Another one is in Westinghouse, we are developing for new generation of reactors. I should have skipped the map thing because I used for PWR for severe accident. Yeah, my personal interaction at that time is with Fauske, their Mike Epstein, and using is fantastic, and their fate code for the source term analysis, because for this advanced reactor, the licensing route more favor to do the source term analysis. That's a new route for the advanced reactor. So we leverage the fate code from Fauske to help us to develop the source term analysis capability for Westinghouse, the liquid metal reactor. We have lead cooled fast reactor, which use the fate code, and so is that the heat pipe reactor, we call Eventually micro reactor, also heavily utilize the fate code as the computer code to do source term analysis, aka is safety analysis right now. It's a very integrated part of safety analysis, not put into PRA domain anymore. It's more right now. Safety analysis is more integrated from design basis or not design basis, whatever we call it, or requires to this source term analysis. So fate code is more and more important for the advanced reactor board. So we appreciated the FI and hence that's early pioneer on this and get a benefit to us many years later. So that's my personal tribute for the panel discussion.
I'm sure everybody wants to go get a drink or something. So one quick story that relates to NASA was I was attached to Lewis Research Center for 21 months while I was part of my Army ROTC obligation. Right after I left to come back to Argonne, Apollo 13 happened. And you all remember what that was. We'll go into it. After a month or two, I get this call from a guy who was a classmate of mine at Notre Dame who worked for NASA. They know the Ohio Paradigm, but they had their own reactor called Plumbrook that was just outside of Cleveland. And they had big zero pressure containment. So he calls me up and says, Bob, any chance we can get you to come over here for a day and tell us whether we're doing the right thing? I said, well, what are you doing? He says, well, you know Apollo 13. And I said, yeah. I said, well, the capsule is on the command module. The LEM was hidden. And that's how they got back. He says, if that pressure had been large enough to separate the command module from the service propulsion module, then they would have never gotten back. He said, okay, that's serious. He says, well, we've been doing tests here, with our vacuum chamber, where we knock up everything we can, and we're getting that there should have been 12 PSI developed between the module, the command module, and the service propulsion module. He says the best we can evaluate for the bolts is 5 PSI. Oh, no. I said, well, that's not good. He said, just come out and tell us what we're missing. So I did, and they were all very friendly, and they were very open with their data and everything. We went over, we looked at the facility, and spent a couple of hours talking about how they did the experiments, and it got repeated. It wasn't just one. And so at the end of the day, we all sat down. I said, guys, I'm almost embarrassed that you're not here today. I think you're doing everything you can. It's just you can't create the rest of the problem. Because you are now sitting here, yes, you can get 0 G, but you're not getting 0 Kelvin or thereabouts. So what saved them from so they could come back home again, basically, was the condensation on all the aluminum that was in there with basically no, Mike will tell you, can give you lectures on this. No intermittent gas, basically. So it's just vapor against the metal. And it's all aluminum. And they didn't have to, they didn't have to condense very much, plus the fact it was vetted pretty well. But that's not where you wanted to, you couldn't build your argument on that. But anyway, I told him you'd have to spend $10 million to get something that's getting close to what the temperature is in space. But that's very important. So you guys did everything you could. There's nothing wrong with what you found. But if you go in and look at, we're getting all this vapor generated oxygen to, and you can condense it. It is, there's no question. So anyway, it was interesting. None of that happened when I was there. But when you get that kind of call, you think, well, this could get really sticky stuff. They were this close to not coming back or whatever.
Well, I'll add one more thing. So you mentioned that we wrote the fake code, which I said before was originally called Hans F. Hans in 1993, Hans sent me out to open up our Hanford office. I shuttled back and forth between Hanford. We had an apartment out there, and Hans would occasionally call me up. I would call back to him a couple times a week. And usually he would say, "Stay out of the papers, Marty." but one day he said that I had a friend over and I had Hans on speaker, and he heard Hans say this. Hans said, "Stay sober, Marty." My friend just fell on the floor. So I just could hear his words.
We appreciate everybody coming. Any comments?
Yeah.
Any more questions?
Worthwhile. It was a wonderful show.
Yes.
Can say that again.
Smart guy.
Any more questions to the panelists?
Well, location of that. Okay, well, next, thank you.
Thank you for attending the session.
Thank you for making sure it happened.
Oh, yeah, it's
Really great.
a very
Thanks for the
important.
group too.
Yeah, that's all.
So it's, I'm not minute for me to get.
Well, that's really good that you were able to. Someone from FAI was trying to get it.
Okay.
Sensor.